Welcome to part 2 of 2. If you missed the previous video on how new freight brokers acquire shippers, you're going to want to go back and rewatch this. But the other challenge for new freight brokers is sourcing and securing capacity once you get a yes from that customer. And this is sort of a chicken egg kind of a thing, right? So if you're a brand new freight broker, you've probably already run into the biggest problem in this industry. You finally get a shipper, you finally get a load, and then suddenly no carrier wants to haul it, right? Why? It's because you don't have credit. You don't have a days to pay history, and carrier factoring companies are rejecting your brokerage automatically. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the exact chicken and egg problem that kills a lot of new freight brokerages before you even get started, right? But here's the truth. You don't need a perfect credit profile to secure truck capacity, okay? You just need the right strategy, right? And this is to help everybody kind of learn from probably thousands of others' mistakes, right? Whole purpose of this channel is to help everybody grow and be successful, right? And be able to scale. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how successful new freight brokers are securing carriers, building trust fast, using factoring partners strategically, leveraging social media, and creating direct carrier relationships, even with zero brokerage history. Okay. And if you stay until the end, I'll give you the exact mindset shift that separates brokers who struggle for months from brokers who build consistent carrier networks quickly. Okay. So let's get into it. Section 1, why new freight brokers struggle to find trucks. Okay. Most new freight brokers think the problem is rates. It's more than likely not. Okay. The real problem is risk. Carriers are constantly evaluating one thing, and that is, am I going to get paid? Okay. Owner operators and small fleets operate on extremely tight margins, right? They have rising fuel costs, rising insurance costs, truck payments, repairs, driver payroll, all these kinds of things, right? They can't afford to wait 45 or 60 days, wondering whether your new brokerage is legit, right? So if you're under the mindset that you get paid from your customer and then you pay that carrier, you're doing it all wrong, okay? Because you want to be able to, you need to be able to pay that carrier in 30 days or less. If your customer is paying you in 30 days, right, you're waiting 30 days to receive your money so that you can pay the carrier. Now that puts you over the 30-day mark, right? And that's does not help establish good carrier relationships at all, okay? Even if it's like a reoccurring lane and that same carrier sees it next time, if they've already waited 45 or 60 days to get paid on the original load, odds are they're never going to haul that lane for you again, right? So, and the issue gets even bigger because most carriers work with factoring companies, okay? And those factoring companies monitor broker credit scores through systems like Ansonia and TransCredit, okay? So whether your brokerage is brand new, or when your brokerage is brand new, there's usually a little to no payment history, okay? So many factoring companies automatically decline your loads. That means even if a carrier wants to work with you, their factoring company may tell them no, right? This is why so many new freight brokers feel stuck, okay? But this is also where smart brokers separate themselves from everyone else, right? Because the brokers who understand how to reduce perceived risk are the ones who secure capacity, right? All the freight brokerages that you see out there everywhere that have a credit score, have a days to pay, they've all pretty much done the same thing since the very beginning, right? Now, obviously, some of those started prior to the internet, social media, LinkedIn, all of these kinds of things where we can now, start to establish a good network with carriers directly through some of these platforms. But let's get into it. So, the power of a factoring partner, okay? One of the smartest things a new freight brokerage can do and is pretty much necessary is partner with a factoring company that specializes in transportation, right? There's all kinds of different factoring companies out there, but you're going to want to work with one that is directly related to the industry, okay? And there's not many factoring companies out there that actually work with new broker authorities. So that's another thing to keep in mind. All right. Operify does work with new broker authorities. They're more of a growth partner than just a financial institution that just processes invoices, right? This is one of the reasons why I recommend them so highly. If you want to check them out, I do have a link in the description down below. Doesn't cost anything to just talk to them, right? And a lot of carriers work with Operify as well, because of that same reason, is because they're as much as they are a financial partner, they're also a growth partner, right? They help you scale and elevate your business. So for those of you that's not familiar, a factoring company is not just helping your cash flow, they're helping you build trust. That trust is what unlocks capacity. And I will add to that any of the carriers that are factoring with that same factoring partner, you will be pre-approved for. So basically, if you follow my advice, you sign up for Operify, right? All of those carriers that also partner with Operify, you're going to be pre-approved with them. Okay. So basically, they're there to help you build trust, right? That trust is what unlocks capacity. One of the biggest advantages is having access to quick pay programs, right? So whether that carrier factors or not, because you are brand new, being able to access, and provide quick pay is a huge advantage. Okay. Quick pay changes that conversation that you have with that carrier completely. Instead of telling carriers, hey, trust me, and I hope you're willing to wait 30 or 45 days to get paid. Now you can say things like, we offer 24 to 48 hour quick pay through our factoring partner, Operify, right? That immediately lowers the risk for that carrier and probably lowers their blood pressure a little bit too, right? Because they're really considering taking your load. They want to work with you, but are they actually going to get paid? Well, this kind of helps alleviate their worry, right? And there's also another huge advantage, and that is having the fact that you have a days to pay letter, right? This is one of the most underrated tools new brokers can use. The days to pay letter is essentially verification from your factoring partner, Operify, right? Showing your payment consistency, like, maybe you've started to run a few loads, and this is what, your factoring partner is able to legitimately to provide you with legitimate information. Like maybe you've done 10 loads, you offered quick pay, and you can get this letter stating that you're paying your carriers inside of 2 days, right? So it'll show like your average payment timeline and your financial reliability, which essentially is your factoring partner, right? They're the ones guaranteeing that payment to your carrier should they decide to accept that load. And because it comes from a trusted, financial partner like Operify, carriers take it more serious. Okay. That document can instantly give your brokerage credibility. Okay. Especially during onboarding. Now, here's something most brokers don't always realize. your credit profile is constantly being monitored. Okay. So if you look, I'm assuming you have your DAT subscription by now. If not, I've got a link down below. They've helped provide us with 10% off per month for the first 12 months. And when you're starting out, obviously, your outgoing monthly expenses, your reoccurring expenses is kind of a big deal, right? Until you start moving loads. But if you use the search load feature on in your DAT subscription, when you look at what other brokers have posted on the right hand side, if you type in a lane, let's say Chicago to Dallas, right? That's only the common one that I use. Those brokers that are posting loads from Chicago to Dallas, let's say it's a dry van load, on the right hand side, it's going to show CS and then a number and then a DTP, which is your days to pay. And carriers see this, right? So if the better your credit score and the lower your days to pay, is kind of enticing to carriers because they want to get paid as quickly as possible. And if they can, if they don't have to utilize quick pay, especially if they're being charged for that quick pay, whatever that percentage might be, it sort of entices them to maybe call you first on that load, especially if another broker, other brokers have loads on that same lane. So, excuse me. And sometimes inaccurate reporting can happen. Okay. So maybe an invoice wasn't submitted correctly. Maybe a factor delayed processing for that carrier. If they're using a factoring company, which I've run into this before, I've had calls from carriers, they said, hey, it's been 60 days. Just wanted to follow up and find out where our payment is. Okay. And come to find out their factoring company never sent it to us. Right. So that's something you can't help. It's a good thing if you're proactive about that, which is something I try to do as much as humanly possible, right? Our days get really busy. But if I know that carrier that I'm working with is factoring, at a certain point, I'm going to follow up with them. If I don't usually receive their invoice within 7 days, I'll start to follow up with them and just say, hey, I know you guys want to get paid as quickly as possible. I noticed that we haven't received an invoice from you. Can you maybe follow up with your factoring company and just ask them if they've sent it out, or when they plan to send it out, so that we can kind of get you paid, right, and kind of balance everything. That's always a really good thing. And when you do that, that's another thing that you can do to help maintain and strengthen your carrier relationships, because they can see that you're genuinely looking out for them, and you're like working on their behalf to make sure that they're getting paid as quickly as possible, right? And they really appreciate that. I can't tell you how many times I got callbacks, hey, thank you, you know what I mean? I reached out to them, after that call, at the end of week 1, when we finished this load, they hadn't sent it out yet, and I followed up, every week, whatever. And they basically kind of had to stay on their factoring company to get that invoice out to us. Right. And 20 days had already passed. And so, they finally sent it out. But if we hadn't been proactive about doing those follow-ups, and it can be difficult, the more carriers you start working with, right? And this is where maybe AI and an AI implementation maybe can set reminders, right? For you to do this. It kind of, rather than you kind of going through, your TMS and sorting out who's invoiced you, who hasn't, so I don't know. Maybe that's something I'll do a future video on. Anyway, so a strong factoring partner can help identify and dispute these errors before they damage your reputation. Okay. And that's critical when you're trying to build a brokerage from scratch, right? You're just starting out, so if you're brand new, you need to understand this. A good factoring partner isn't just financial support, it's a reputation support. Okay. Using Facebook to find carriers fast. Okay. Now, let's talk about one of the fastest ways you can secure capacity as a new freight broker, and that's using Facebook groups. If you're not already a member, I highly suggest you join our group, Freight Brokers and Carriers Network Group. Okay. There's another one that's out there that's similar, but ours ends with the word group. Okay. Just because we had to distinguish, we had ours first, they copied basically. But anywho, so most brokers spend all their time on, load boards like DAT or Truck Stop or any of the other ones that are out there. DAT being king of all, but anywho, but here's the issue. Okay. Those load board platforms are highly competitive. Okay. And carriers on those boards often filter brokers based on their credit immediately. Okay. But Facebook works differently. Okay. So Facebook allows you to maintain human relationships. Okay. It makes that connection more intimate. Okay. So there's thousands of owner operators, dispatchers, small fleets out there actively looking for freight in logistics groups every single day, and it might be for any number of reasons, right? Rather than just hunting, on the load board. And this is where transparency becomes, your biggest weapon, right? A lot of new brokers try to hide the fact that they're new because they don't want the fact that they're new to be a deterrent, to them being able to work with carriers. But that's a mistake. Okay. Instead, I suggest be upfront with it about it, right? Say something like, we're a new brokerage, we are fully bonded, backed by our factoring partner, Operify. We can offer you, 24, 48-hour quick pay, and we're looking for reliable flatbed carriers out of Chicago, right? That honesty really matters. And when carriers hear, obviously the fact that, your bond's still good, you can offer them quick pay and, responsive communication, many are willing to give you an opportunity. Okay. Especially your owner operators. Another major advantage to Facebook groups is relationship speed. Okay. You can build reoccurring carrier relationships far faster than, cold load board transactions. Okay. And over time, those relationships become your private carrier network. And that's where real brokerage starts to, growth starts. Okay. Using Reddit to understand the market. Reddit is a very popular platform, and a lot of brokers completely overlook it. Okay. But Reddit is incredibly valued for understanding the real frustrations carriers deal with on a daily basis. All right. And there's communities out there like Freight Brokers, and there's another one called Logistics, and they can help you learn, right? Which lanes are tight, current market conditions, common broker mistakes, what carriers actually want from brokers. Which, that being said, if you're really looking for some deep dive insight into what carriers are looking for from brokers, I try to post polls and questions to carriers to give brokers the opportunity to learn from carriers' pain points. Okay. Why it matters to them and what we can do about it, right? And that just, once again, helps us build and strengthen our carrier relationships. And honestly, we should stop treating carriers like a commodity and start treating them as growth partners. Okay. Just like your customer or your shipper. Okay. In my humble opinion, neither one is like really more important than the other. But if I had to choose, I would say probably my carrier relationships are probably hold a slight lead, a lead over my customer relationships. Because, I'm going to tell you this as someone who's been in the industry for, a long time. It's much easier to acquire a new customer, right, and to build that relationship than it is with a carrier. Okay. And you try to find out, what lanes that they're running on the regular, if they are, which hopefully they are, right? Staying consistent. Maybe putting a dumbbell together for them. If you're not familiar with what a dumbbell is, I go into that in some detail. It's basically you've got pickups from one point regularly delivering to another point. And so then you reach out to either that receiver or another shipper in that area looking for loads that go back right to where your original shipper is from. And so then that carrier, you can tell that carrier, hey, I've got this load, out of Chicago going to Dallas. And if you're interested, I've got consistent loads back out of Dallas going, back to Chicago. This is something because there's not just for us, but for carriers as well. Time management is huge, right? So if you can save them time, come to an agreement on the rate, it saves them time for hunting and pecking on the load board, for a load back out of Dallas going to Chicago, right? It helps them grow and stay consistent. And at the same time, it builds your customer relationships on both ends, right? Because you've got basically that dedicated capacity to run for you and your customers back and forth, back and forth. So, like I said, treat them as a growth partner, not as a commodity. Okay. Let's get back to it. Rant over. All right. And so anyway, to pick back up where I was at, and this is important because Reddit is less about posting loads and it's more about listening. Okay. The brokers who understand carrier pain points becomes easier to work with, right? Kind of as sort of what I mentioned a moment ago. You'll also occasionally see carriers talking about where they need freight. And that can open the door to some direct conversations and relationship building. Okay. But the biggest value is market awareness. So if you understand what frustrates carriers, you immediately position yourself above, the average broker who might just be a load board jockey. And Lord knows there's a plethora of them out there. Okay. Unfortunately, they don't they they don't treat their customers, they don't build relationships with their customers, they don't build relationships with their carriers, and then they end up losing their customers, they end up losing, their their carriers, and they're constantly posting to the load board. If I don't have to post to the load board and send out just an email or build that consistent freight and where I can tell, or that consistent capacity, and I can tell my customer, hey, I know we've got this load going out, one a day, Monday through Friday, just send them over to me. I've already got the trucks for it, right? And you see where I'm going with that? It works out for everybody involved. The next thing I want to talk to you about is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is essentially a kind of a hidden gold mine for you. Okay. So let's talk about the most underused platform in freight brokerage. All right. Again, that being LinkedIn. Most brokers only think about LinkedIn for finding customers or shippers, right? But it's also incredibly powerful for finding and vetting carriers. Okay. Which, speaking of vetting carriers, if you don't already have a platform where you can vet carriers, I highly recommend eCarrier Check. it's a really good platform for vetting carriers, and they've got shipper leads on there as well, right? So if you're saying, oh, I don't know how to source leads, and this and that, there's multiple ways of doing it. But rather than going through the headache and the time of, using Google Maps, which I've seen other people post, videos for freight brokers, and they say, well, this is my process, and I go to Google Maps and I look up businesses in this area, and then I do this and I do that, and it's like a 10-step process, right? They've got it all right there for you, right? All in the same platform on the same website. So it's extremely advantageous to have eCarrier Check. So check them out. There's a link down below for them as well. Okay. So your LinkedIn profile is basically, think about it as like your digital storefront or your digital online profile, right? When carriers or dispatchers look you up, what do they see, right? Do they say professionalism? Do you have an image? What does your outline look like? All these kinds of things, right? Or do they just see an empty profile with basically no credibility? Okay, your headline matters. Don't just say freight broker. Try using something like providing reliable freight solutions and fast carrier payments. Okay, that immediately communicates value. Your summary on your profile should emphasize things like transparent communication, fair rates, long-term carrier relationships, and fast payment solutions. Okay. And here's where LinkedIn becomes powerful. You can proactively search for dispatchers, owner operators, small fleet owners, and carrier sales reps. Okay. Another thing I will add to that is utilizing groups inside of LinkedIn. Facebook's not the only place that has groups, but LinkedIn has groups as well. So search, find those out, request membership, and start networking through those groups as well. But before you do that, make sure you have your profile set up and complete, okay, using the tips I just provided. And instead of just sending generic connection requests, right? I think we've talked about that in previous videos as well. Like, don't just send generic connection requests to your prospects, your shippers and potential customers on LinkedIn. Don't do that to potential carriers either. Personalize them. Mention a freight lane. Mention a mutual interest. Mention industry challenges. A lot of times that small personalization can dramatically improve the response rate, right? And LinkedIn also helps with carrier vetting. You can evaluate them based on professionalism, company activity, their network quality, and business consistency. I am tripping over my own tongue today. I apologize, everybody. But before ever booking a load, right? And another major strategy is, maybe I had too much coffee. Start posting content, right? Start sharing stuff like market rate updates, capacity insights, fuel trends, right? Fuel being a big thing currently, operational lessons, successful load coverage stories. And when you're brand new, especially if you don't have any prior history working, in the industry, you can kind of scrape some of that content or reuse some of the content that you find on Facebook groups, right? Infographics, things like that. Share that out. I found this, you could say something like, I found this extremely interesting, thought I would share, right? It might even be something you found in a LinkedIn group. Okay. Um, when you consistently share value, carriers start viewing you as a serious professional, right? And not just some noob. Okay. And people prefer working with brokers they recognize, and that visibility really matters. Okay. Um, how to build direct care relationships. Um, at the end of the day, this business still comes down to relationships, not software, not load boards, not automation, not AI, right? Relationships. And if you're new, you need to become extremely good at relationship building. First, offer incentives. Okay. Early on, you may need to pay slightly above market, right? You're gonna have to shrink your margin, little to no margin. You may need to offer fuel advances, but again, I was almost hesitant to include this one um, because you really make sure that you're really vetting that carrier very, very well because of all the fraud in the industry. There's scammers out there that, they'll request a fuel advance. They basically have kind of figured out that you're new and you probably don't know any better. You pay them the fuel advance, they never pick up the load, right? They're just gone like a fart in the wind. Um, so, um, but anyway, you do these things because you're basically buying their trust. Okay. And trust becomes reoccurring capacity. Second, over communicate, right? You can't communicate enough. And this is one of the easiest ways to stand out. Okay. Carriers hate it when brokers just disappear. Okay. So answer your phone, respond as quickly as possible, uh, provide accurate details, right? And if your shipper, your customer is giving you kind of vague details on the load, ask. Okay. Ask so that you can relay that information to your carrier. Okay. Because they hate it when there's surprises, right? They're counting on you to relay all pertinent information to them, right? So that they can do their job better and avoid delays. Okay. And this helps with your customers as well, because when they've got delays at the docks get backed up, things like this, right? Their yard gets filled up with other trucks trying to get into the dock. It becomes chaos. And so when you start, if you've watched any of my previous videos, I've mentioned about, checking out Google reviews on shippers before you call them. And, because drivers love to leave reviews, Google reviews. And one of the things that I look at is, you'll see comments on there like, oh, I arrived at 8 o'clock. It's now 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I still don't have a door yet. Well, why is that? Okay. Did they already get jammed up first thing in the morning? Maybe they opened and start loading trucks at 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever the situation may be. And within 2 hours, they're already jammed up, right? And those delays just compound, right? So whatever you can do to help avoid those delays not only helps your customer, with congestion at the docks and in the yard, it helps your carriers out as well, right? Because they're really counting on getting in and out of there inside of 2 hours. Okay. So basically, a responsive broker becomes memorable very quickly. And third, create consistency. Okay. Once you find a good carrier, try to do your best to keep them loaded, right? Even if it's one load per week, right? Consistency creates loyalty. And eventually your relationships become stronger and your becomes stronger than your credit profile. Okay. And that's the goal, because once carriers trust you personally, they stop viewing you as the new broker or the noob, right? And they start viewing you as a reliable business partner. Okay. I'm going to kind of wrap this up with a quick conclusion overview, right? A recap. Um, if you're a brand new freight broker struggling to secure truck capacity, there's some things you just try to remember this. You are not trying to, you are not trying to eliminate risk. Sorry, I almost tripped over my tongue again there. You are trying to reduce perceived risk. Okay. And you do that by partnering with a strong factoring company like Operfi, offering quick pay, using a data pay letter, networking through social media like Facebook groups, learning through Reddit communities, um, building authority on LinkedIn with a strong profile, communicating better than most other brokers out there. Okay. And creating long-term carrier relationships. With every successful brokerage, excuse me, every successful brokerage started with zero credit history at some point. Okay. And the difference is that the successful brokers learned how to build trust faster than everybody else. And that's basically the real game, right? If this video helped you, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and drop a comment below with what your biggest challenges are that you're facing right now as a freight broker. Okay. And if you want more, dang it. If you want more real world freight broker training content designed to help you grow faster in this industry, stay tuned because I've got a lot more coming. I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks.